One of the things that I rarely talk about here on my channel when it comes to being a self-taught programmer is just how close I came to really burning out and not being able to learn this. Like, for example, I learned how to code back in 2014. I landed my first job in 2015. But that year that it took for me to learn to code was extremely difficult. There were many times that I questioned my sanity, my abilities, and nearly quit. But thankfully, I didn't. I landed my first job. And in this video, I wanted to share with you like what really made it so hard for me, so that you can understand a little bit about the realities of this. So if you're learning to code on your own, or if you're going to start doing this, you'll have a much better understanding. So for me, the best place to really start talking about this is going back in the time machine to 2014. Back then, the hardest part for me was the fact that I wasn't learning to code in a vacuum, right? In other words, I had a job. I was working as a car salesman, by the way. I had bills that were due. I had a car note. I had rent that I had to pay. I had to commute 2 hours a day. So when I decided that I wanted to become a software developer, I couldn't just drop everything and do this full time 40 hours per week. I had responsibilities. This is something that most of you guys can relate to. Most of you probably don't like live at home, like barely eke by, and can just like start using all of your time for this. You have responsibilities. That could be a family, that could be a full time job. It could even be a career. I know some of you guys are lawyers or you have some high paying job, but you still want to change careers. This is the hardest part, in my opinion, because yes, theoretically, all of you and myself back then, I could have done this very, very well, very effectively if I hadn't had all those things. But the truth is, it was very, very messy. The success here is not some great story where I was just like every day waking up and like, oh my God, this is amazing. It was like a war, it was like a battle. And really, that's the one thing that I can share with you. I have vivid memories of having long days at work. I was super tired. I would come home and go, you know what? The one thing I have to do, even though I can barely see through my bloodshot eyes right now, is to sit down in front of my computer, watch 20 minutes of a tutorial, work on a little bit of code, go to bed early, and then wake up in the morning early before work tomorrow and do the same thing. That's what I remember more than anything else. There were good days. Sometimes I would be able to sit for a 2, 3 hour study session on a day off. I'd be totally clear minded. I'd be like, okay, let's do this. But most of it was like, how can I get myself in front of my computer? How can I get myself in front of the headfirst JavaScript book that I was using to learn JavaScript? It wasn't pretty. So this is really messy. And the first thing I'll say is like, that was really hard for me. That there were times when I questioned my sanity. But the one thing I can share with you guys is if you're going to do this or you're doing this right now is just remember the most important thing is showing up. There are going to be times where it feels like you're not doing this correctly. You're not learning, you're not making progress. The most important thing is show up day in, day out. Consistency is much more important than anything else in this game. So that's the first thing. Now, that's really hard. You guys know how hard that is. If you want something easy to make this journey a little bit easier to learn to code, the one thing I can recommend is going down below and smashing the subscribe button, because if you're getting new videos from me about how to learn to code, how to make the journey easier, that's going to be good for you. So keep that in mind as well. Now, the second thing that I found to be very, very difficult over the long haul, right? So after about a month, 2 months, the fun parts of learning to code kind of wear off, right? At first, you're excited. It's so crazy. You're going to like earn 6 figures because you're going to teach yourself this on your own. You're not going to go to school. But after a certain point, things start to fade and you just becomes a part of your life. You're studying, you're learning this. And the hard part, the thing that really started to grind to me at that point was just the uncertainty of it all, right? So I had originally started to learn to code because I had a friend who told me he was a software developer. He's like, Andy, I think you could be a software developer. And guess what? If you want to be a software developer, you can read this book, this headfirst JavaScript book that he recommended, build some projects, and just start applying for jobs. I was like, okay, cool. Well, I started doing that, but after again some time, I was like starting to doubt this. I was like, well, just because he did it doesn't mean I could do it. There was no social media, there's no YouTube, or I shouldn't say there was no YouTubers who were talking about being self-taught developers like there are now. So I was just going off his word alone. And I started to have very, very creeping doubts about whether this is possible because I'm spending 30, maybe 40 hours per week at times on this. I'm spending maybe hundreds of hours at that point. And I'm starting to see like if this isn't really possible, if he's just kind of blowing smoke up my butt, then I'm just wasting all of my time, right? Because I could be spending this with my friends. I could be spending this working on a different career, getting better at sales, which is what I was currently doing. And so that doubt will start to almost like eat away at your motivation. And you need motivation, right? You need to be able to have your eyes on the prize. Okay, I'm doing this, I'm going to show up. But you can't help, any rational or reasonable person can't help but start to have doubts, maybe start to question whether they can do this, and then that chips away at their resolve. Now, one of the things that makes this even harder about this is that on a day-to-day basis, one of the most motivating things that you can have is seeing progress. But when you're just showing up and putting in your hour or two every single day, when you're learning something from a book, a tutorial, or even just building a project, it's actually really hard to see that you made any progress on a daily basis, right? And so without seeing that progress, it really gets hard to continually motivate yourself. However, I can tell you a quick trick that will really help you. Anytime that you feel like you're not making progress, you're losing motivation, always remember to go back and look a little bit farther back than just a day. So if you look back a week from today, a week back, you'll be able to see that you've made improvements. Maybe you'll remember something that you had that was like an aha moment, something that you didn't know a week prior. Or it could be look back a month ago, see what projects you built, see what concepts you learned, see how much progress you made. That's much more motivating. So it's going to be hard. Like that part of the uncertainty and also just not seeing the daily progress are things that definitely really started to chip away at my motivation. And you add the stress of having a job. But just remember that if you can frame things and see that you are making those little 0.01% progress, it will help you float you through this period. Now, the last thing that really, I would say, added the most stress onto everything I had been learning for, I'd say, 10 or 11 months, I started applying for jobs. That part was pretty smooth. I applied for jobs. I got mostly no responses, but I finally got my first response. I got a call back from a recruiter who said that they wanted to bring me in for an interview. And at that point, the most stressful thing happened. I had like this radiating fear go throughout my body. I remember being so terrified. I almost wanted to call the recruiter and just cancel and be like, you know what, I can't make it, I'm sick or something. I was just trying to make up an excuse. I have no idea why I felt that way. I remember it was so irrational, but I felt like the thing I want to do was just kind of run away from everything. Looking back on it now, the reason I felt that fear, the reason I had all that added stress there was because I was very scared that what I was doing was somehow fraudulent, right? Like almost like a con artist. Like I got myself an interview just learning through books and building out projects. Something about that doesn't feel right in the way that our society promotes, being ready for something. You have to go to school, you have to do things the right way, go to school, get a 4-year degree, and then you're ready. I felt like I had foregone all that. I was somehow fraudulent. And if you're fraudulent, the reason I felt so much fear is that I think what happens is if you feel like you're fraudulent, you'll feel like you'll be called out as fraudulent, you'll have a reputation as being a fraud, and then you won't be able to get a job, you won't be able to pay rent, you won't be able to pay for food, and then you'll eventually die because you won't be able to feed yourself, right? Like that's the completely crazy, irrational fear that if you look at it logically, that's what's basically happening. So I basically decided at that point, I was really scared, but I was just going to put one foot in front of the other. I was going to go to the interview, and no matter what, I was just going to let the chips fall where they may, because it was better than any other options I had. I didn't want to go back to my career in car sales. I didn't have any other sort of backup options, right? So I just pushed through the fear. Now, I went to the interview and it went really well, but I remember at the interview, I was just saying to myself, like, okay, just be honest. Don't lie, just put it on the table. And I think that really worked for me. But the one thing I can share with you guys is, first of all, it's probably pretty likely that you're going to have fear when you go in that interview process. I work with clients now. Like I have people who I help in my mentorship program, and a lot of the things that I see is they go to interviews and there's a lot of fear. The one thing I can help you with that will help you overcome these fears that you're going to have, it's likely, is that number one, you're never going to feel ready. So like when you start applying for jobs and you say you get an interview, you're probably gonna make excuses for yourself. They're gonna sound something like, oh, well, I really need to spend more time learning another programming language or some framework or some library or some more concepts, some more design patterns. You'll find any excuse in the book because you're just gonna have some fears about the interview. Like you're probably gonna feel like you are gonna bomb the interview and you don't wanna bomb it. You don't wanna go there and be called fraudulent or have them laugh in your face, which is, again, irrational fears, but this is what we have. Remember that that's not a real fear. Like just go even before you're ready is okay, because what's going to happen is, let's say you go to an interview and you bomb it. The worst possible scenario, the thing that most of you guys have the greatest fear is that you're going to go to an interview, you're going to bomb, and you're going to think like they're going to make fun of you or something, right? The truth is, what I've seen, again, working with clients in my mentorship program, is that bombing is one of the best things that can happen to you, because bombing an interview is not that bad. Usually you just don't do well and then you leave the interview, and you'll see that bombing is not something to be afraid of. But even more, you'll see that you'll have a lot to learn from the interview process itself. First of all, you'll be validated that you even got an interview, which is really good, but you'll also see that the interview process is something that you can prepare for. There's nothing that you can't prepare for in an interview process, and so you'll learn a lot from it. I vividly remember that fear being crippling, terrifying. I don't know how I got through it, but there are ways to sort of manage it as you're going through this process. By the way, if you're interested in working in my mentorship program, I have a mentorship program where I work with people to help them to learn to code. So if you are that type of person, if you're dedicated, if you're really hardworking, I will leave a link in the description below of how you can join that program. It is a link to book a call with me. On that call, I will ask you questions. I really want to know what your goals are. Well, where you're currently at with things, where are you struggling? And if I can tell things are a good fit, great. I can then explain what your individually tailored mentorship program will look like. I will also obviously include, what the investment is and that sort of thing. So if you're interested, definitely go down below and check that out. Other than that, that's all I've got for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching. Peace.